One day at Grand Central Station in New York City, a homeless man sees a person who appears out of nowhere. A man in sunglasses stands in the middle of a crowd and calmly looks at everyone. At this time, a woman screams. The man helps the lady up when the police appear. They decide that he did it, although the homeless man claims that the attackers ran away. The man is asked questions about his tickets and luggage, but he claims that he does not need either one and refuses to take off his glasses because it is very bright on this planet. The police take the strange passenger away. As a result, he is placed in a mental hospital. That day, Dr. Mark Powell, for some reason, pays attention to the new guy who is just being admitted to the clinic. He asks to see his file and draws attention to the fact that he does not have a concussion, a tumor, or epilepsy, but he does have amnesia. He does not consider himself a human and claims to have arrived from another planet, and there is no name or search request in his file. The man calls himself Prot and says that he is not sick, although he suffers from nostalgia for his planet Capex, located in the constellation Lyra. He got to Earth using light energy, which is not available here. The doctor notes his excellent command of English. After the conversation, Prot goes to the common room, where the patients spend their free time. At first, they are wary of the man, but he talks about his planet, which is much larger than Earth and has 7 moons. The doctor goes home and constantly thinks about the strange patient. The next day, he shows the recording of yesterday's conversation with Prot to his colleagues, but no one knows how or how to treat him. Mark resumes conversations with Prot, who for some reason eats fruit with the peel, and tells about the planet Capex in such detail that the doctor does not know what to think. After the conversation, Prot tries to get acquainted with one of the patients named Bess, who has lived in the clinic since childhood after a fire. Another patient, Doris, refuses to leave the room, although Prot admits that she is not crazy, but romantic. Meanwhile, the doctors examine Prot's eyes, which are really sensitive to light. Mark closes the windows and turns off the light, and Prot finally takes off his glasses. He continues to talk about the inhabitants of Capex, who do not create families, and their children are raised by the whole community. There are also no authorities or punitive organizations, because the inhabitants live by the principles of goodness. Later at home, Mark asks his sister's husband, Steve, who works at the observatory, to organize a meeting with scientists for Prot. He hopes to prove that such a planet does not exist, and to do this, he asks to compile a questionnaire on astronomy. Arriving at the clinic, the doctor pays attention to the patient Howie, who is sitting by the window, and answers Mark's question that Prot ordered him to find the bluebird of happiness. And if Howie completes 3 of his tasks, he will be cured. Later, the doctor finds Prot talking to the patient Ernie, who is afraid to breathe air. He convinces him that it is not dangerous. The doctor is angry because you can't promise patients that he can cure them, but the man is sure that every creature can cure itself. And if Mark is a real doctor, then why hasn't he cured all these people yet? And then he gives him a piece of paper with his written answers to Steve's questions, hoping that they will satisfy Mark. Later, a discouraged Steve says that he has absolutely accurately described the location of the planet Capex, which was discovered quite recently. Soon, Mark takes the man to a meeting with famous astronomers, who are amazed at the accuracy of his answers. They are especially surprised by the calculations of the physically correct trajectory of the planet Capex. But this information has not yet been published and is known only to a few people around the world. Meanwhile, in the clinic, Howie goes to the window and suddenly sees a blue bird. Patients and staff come running to his cry. The whole hospital rejoices, people shout and wave their hands. Mark also comes to the noise and is surprised to see an ordinary blue jay outside the window. But how many changes it has brought to his patients. The recluse Doris left the room. The always silent Bess spoke up. In general, the changes were good, and later Prot explains to Mark that he can take one person, and when he returns, he will choose the most worthy. And it will be on July 25th at 5:51 a.m. Mark is tasked with such precision, and even in his sleep, thinks about what this date means. He listens to the recording of their conversations and eventually understands that exactly 5 years ago, on July 27th, some drama happened to Prot. The next day, Mark's family welcomes the man into their home, hoping that in a family setting, he will be able to somehow give himself away. At first, Prot behaves calmly, but suddenly, seeing a dog, runs towards it. The dog, who has never liked anyone, literally throws himself into the man's arms, and he suddenly begins to bark, as if talking to the dog. And then he translates its request that the children stop hiding her favorite sneaker. And it also has poor hearing, so they should not sneak up on her. Later, he walks around the property, plays with the children, and admires the flowers. Entering the house, he looks at the photos and, having learned that the photo shows Mark's son from his first marriage, talks to the doctor's wife about the value of family because there are none on Capex. Going out into the yard again, the man begins to swing the girl on the swing, and the doctor notices that he does it as if it was once his usual thing. Pratt acts like a normal person until the lawn sprinkler system is turned on. It's as if he's been replaced. He grabs Mark's daughter and tries to pull her out from under the stream, shouting about the dangers of water. Those around him have to use force to calm him down. But as soon as the water's turned off, Pratt immediately becomes quiet. Mark describes what happened to his boss, Claudia Villers. Pratt sincerely tried to save his daughter. Apparently, the incident that broke him was related to water. However, that day Pratt disappears, and other patients report that he went to Greenland to finish his report, but he will be back soon. They search for the man throughout the clinic and cannot find him. And only 3 days later, he suddenly appears in the garden. Angry Mark forces the man to undergo a method of deep hypnosis, and during the session, Pratt remembers the coffin of his friend's father. Mark asks him to move forward a little. He calms down and tells that when his friend was sick, his father bought a telescope and told him about the constellations every night. But now his friend calls him when something bad happens. And then the man starts to worry, and the doctor wakes him up. Later, he asks the secretary to find out the addresses of all the farms in the United States, excluding large cities where the stars are not visible. Meanwhile, Howie suggests that the patients hold an essay contest so that Pratt, after reading them, can decide who to take with him. And he again undergoes a hypnosis session. This time, he does not go so far and sees his friend, but flatly refuses to give his name. But he says the year is 1985. Pratt says that his friend is 17 years old and his girlfriend is expecting a child. Mark asks him to move forward 2 weeks, and he says that it is now 1991, and this time his friend called him without any purpose. That friend is a hammerman. He has a small house, trees, and a river. He is married to Sarah, and they have a daughter, Rebecca. After the session, the doctors inform that Howie almost strangled Ernie. Mark hurries to the patient and is met by a calm, enlightened man who says that Howie strangled him on Pratt's orders. The thing is that, having returned to life, he realized that there is no point in being afraid of everything and everyone, because destruction is always nearby, and a person can do nothing about it. Now Ernie can calmly sleep on his stomach, eat fish with bones, and swallow the largest pills. He really got better. Howie is also happy that he healed his friend. One more completed task from Pratt, and he will also be healed. Mark constantly thinks about Pratt's case and continues the sessions. One day he decides to name the date of July 27th, but Pratt assures him that he is collecting mushrooms on Capex. But suddenly he hears his friend's call and hurries to the ground. He sees him by the river. He undresses because he wants to leave, since he did something terrible. At the mention of Sarah and Rebecca, Pratt has a fit of rage. Mark has to bring him out of hypnosis. Later, the doctor's driving home, and suddenly a pencil stub that he took from Pratt falls out of his pocket. Mark reads the numbers left on it and finds the place where he bought it. He figures out the name of the town and finds an article in the newspaper for July 28th, 5 years ago, which tells about the tragedy that occurred in the family of Robert Porter. The doctor rushes to that town, and the sheriff brings Mark to Porter's former home and tells him about the terrible tragedy. At that time, a family lived there, a farmer Robert, his wife Sarah, and daughter Rebecca. During the story, Mark seems to see everything with his own eyes. When Robert was at work, an ex-con broke into their house. It all started as a simple robbery, and then the bandit took his wife by force, after which he destroyed both. Porter returned home and caught the scoundrel at the scene of the crime. The strong man destroyed the criminal, then went to the river and threw himself into the water. Mark is so impressed by this story that he cannot hold back his tears, and the sheriff shows him the river and asks him to keep the identity of the found man a secret because he has suffered enough. Mark returns home and, looking at his family, understands piercingly it's the main thing that makes life worth living. Meanwhile, the patients of the clinic throw a party in honor of Pratt's departure and demand to know who the lucky guy is who is flying to Capex. Howie collects essays while Mark sees Pratt. He advises him to see his family more often and invite his son to the party. He learned that all creatures on Earth are connected to each other, but there is no such thing on Capex. If he does not return, no one will miss him. Pratt just needs to finish his report, but he has lost his pencil. Mark gives him his pen and shows him a photo, trying to prove that it is him, but he refuses to admit it. Meanwhile, Sel asks a direct question, wanting to know who Pratt will take with him, and Pratt announces that the first one to fall asleep will get an extra point. People run to their rooms, and Pratt gives Howie his last task, to stay here and be ready for anything. The tired doctor returns home, where he falls asleep on the couch so as not to miss the hour appointed by Pratt. Night falls, the hospital falls asleep, and only Pratt sits on the bed. The guards tensely watch the monitors and argue whether he will fly away or not. The appointed hour approaches, but the doctor is late. The sun rises, Mark runs up the stairs, while the man takes off his glasses, puts them on the table, and at that moment the cameras stop working. The sunrise floods Pratt's entire ward with light when Doris comes out of the room and prevents the doctor from getting into the ward on time. When he finally runs in, he sees an empty room and then finds an unconscious man under the bed. He is wheeled along the corridors on a gurney, but those around him do not recognize him. And then the news comes that Bess has disappeared from her ward, so Pratt chose her because her essay said that she had no home. Sometime later, the doctor's pushing Pratt in a wheelchair. The man can't speak or move, but Mark thinks he hears and understands everything. And so the doctor tells him that Howie works in the library and Ernie has become a crisis psychologist. But they still haven't found Bess. When Mark asks Robert if he knows what really happened on July 27th, he only smiles mysteriously, and Mark promises to wait as long as necessary, and when he can, let him reveal his secret. Later at the airport, Dr. Mark and his eldest son meet to remember that they are the closest people to each other. And Pratt's voice is heard behind the scenes, saying that on CAPEX they have long understood that the universe is expanding and contracting, and it will always be like this, and everything will always repeat itself. Therefore, mistakes need to be corrected, because there simply won't be another time. Let's discuss how to understand the ending of the film. A fantastic option. The alien left Earth, leaving Porter's body and moving into Bess's body, thereby helping her find her home. The realistic ending suggests that the sick man's brain was simply destroyed, and the girl ran away in search of mythical happiness.